The cold night air was quiet as you lay hidden on the rocky mountainside. You were a sniper in the elite 707th Special Mission Group, known as one of the best in South Korea. Your breathing was calm and your aim was steady. Tonight's mission was very important. Stop a group smuggling dangerous weapons across the border, but what made it harder was the person leading the team on the ground, John Jungkook. Jungkook was a fearless commando, famous for being called the Iron Wolf. He was tough and brave, always rushing into danger. But you and Jungkook didn't get along. You two are opposites. You like to plan and wait for the right moment, while Jungkook preferred to jump straight into action. As the mission started, you spoke into the comms. Ground team, I see the targets moving west. I can take out the leader. Before you could shoot, Jungkook's voice interrupted. No sniper, don't fire, we are going in. You clench your teeth in frustration. If you go in now, you'll ruin the mission. Let me handle this. Jungkook's reply was sharp. I don't need you babysitting us from up there. Stick to your scope and follow my orders. You felt the anger rise in your chest, but you stayed calm. Adjusting your aim, you covered Jungkook and his team as they moved in. Suddenly, gunfire broke out and the mission turned chaotic. From your spot, you shot down several enemies, saving Jungkook's team more than once. When it was over and the smugglers were caught, Jungkook marched up to your position. His gear was dirty and he looked angry. You ignored my orders, he said in cold tone. You stood up meeting his glare, and you almost caught your whole team with your reckless plan. Someone had to make sure you stayed alive. He stepped closer, his face inches from yours. The tension was heavy. You think you're better than me because you hide up here with a scope? Try fighting face to face with the enemy sometime. You crossed your arms, refusing to back down, and you think running in like a hero is smart. If I hadn't been covering you, you wouldn't even be here right now. You both made an intense eye contact, no one ready to back down, while the other team members shared glances at each other before everyone returned to the military base. The argument resumed the next day as soon as Jungkook and you saw each other in the field. The argument carried on, heating up during the mission debriefing. You and Jungkook couldn't stop blaming each other, your voices loud and sharp. You are the one who put the mission in danger, Jungkook said angrily, glaring at you. And you ignored the plan, like always. You shot back, standing your ground. Colonel Park, your commanding officer, suddenly slammed his hand on the table. The loud bang made the room go silent. His face was stern and his voice was strong and sharp. That's enough, both of you. The room felt heavy as his serious eyes moved between you and Jungkook. Everyone else stayed quiet, not daring to interrupt. You are not just regular soldiers. You are leaders, some of the best in this unit. But the way you two are behaving is completely unacceptable. This constant arguing is out of control. Jungkook tried to speak, but Colonel Park raised his hand to stop him. Don't say a word. Do you think the enemy cares about your silly fights? Do you think this team can afford mistakes because of your egos? People's lives are at risk when you act like this. You stood still, your face calm, but inside you knew his words were serious. Jungkook clenched his fist, his jaw tight, saying nothing. You are going to work together on the next mission, and I don't care if you don't like each other. You will work as a team. If you don't, I'll make sure neither of you goes on another mission. Do you understand me? Yes, sir, you both said quietly. Colonel Park slammed the table again. Louder. Yes, sir. And you and Jungkook said in unison, louder this time. Colonel Park leaned back in his chair, his sharp eyes still watching you. Dismissed. Don't make me regret giving you another chance. As you left the room, you and Jungkook exchanged cold glares. The tension between you still strong. You both knew this wasn't over yet. After the debriefing, you decided to focus on your work. You spent hours in the armory adjusting your sniper rifle and checking the equipment for the next mission. Keeping busy helped You forget about the frustration that came with Jungkook. You avoided him completely, choosing to work on strategies, review maps, and practice at the shooting spot. But no matter how hard you tried to focus, you couldn't help but notice Jungkook. It felt like he was everywhere and not by accident. The air felt heavier as you stepped out of the tactical planning room, your mind racing through mission details. You had been buried in maps and strategies all day, but there was a weight on your chest that you couldn't shake. As you turned, you froze. Jungkook was standing in front of Sergeant Minji, the two of them casually talking, his usual aloof personality replaced with something entirely different. A rare smile grazed his lips, a smile that made your stomach twist. He was leaning in, adjusting her gear with a light touch, his fingers brushing against her arm, a gesture far too intimate for your liking. You stopped, trying to stay out of sight, but it felt like everything around you was making you feel small. Jungkook's voice was quiet but clear, aimed at you on purpose. Minji, I don't know if I've told you this before, but you need to stop wearing that extra layers under your vest. It's making things harder for you. Minji laughed softly, brushing her hand against her neck in a nervous but comfortable way. I'll remember that, Jungkook. Thanks for the advice. He leaned in closer, his face almost touching hers as he adjusted her vest strap, speaking softly. You have got the right build for this, but you need to be more flexible. It's not just about strength, it's about knowing how to move. He brushed something off her shoulder, his fingers staying there just a little too long. The blood turned cold. You didn't need to hear more to know what was happening. It was clear what he was doing. He glanced at you, his smirk growing slightly when he caught your eyes. You know how dangerous this mission is. We need you focused. Minji nodded, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I'm good, thanks, Jungkook. I'll be fine out there with you covering me. His smile deepened at her words, and for the first time in ages, you saw the kind of expression you wished had been directed to you, warm, approving, and affectionate. It felt like a mockery considering the cold silence that had grown between you and him. But you weren't about to let him see how much it bothered you. You turned away quickly, clenching your fist at your sides as you fought the rush of heat in your chest. Your heart beat faster, but you wouldn't let him have the satisfaction of seeing you unravel. As you walked away, you could hear Jungkook's voice rise again, just a little louder than before, clearly aiming for you to hear. Minji, you know Sniper's not going to be happy if we are late. She's got that perfectionist streak, always checking her scope like it's her lifeline. I can almost hear her sighing from here. Minji laughed, but it wasn't like the usual polite chuckles. This was lighter, almost flirtatious. I've heard the stories, but if anyone can get this job done, it's her. I have no doubt. Jungkook's voice was warm, yet there was something else in his tone, something sharp. He knew you were listening, and he was making sure to remind you, loud and clear, that you weren't the only one who could rely on, that he had other allies, other people to talk to, people who didn't give him the silent treatment. You force yourself to ignore the nagging pull in your chest, walking briskly as they continued to talk. Better get ready, Minji. The sniper's gonna make sure we stay on track. Just don't let her see you smile too much. She might think you're trying to steal her spotlight. You could feel the heat rise in your cheeks as your pace quickened, but you didn't stop. You focused on the mission, on everything except the two of them. You had to. But as you rounded the corner, you could still hear him, still feel the weight of his gaze following you. The evening was quiet at the barracks. Outside, you could hear soldiers practicing, but the sounds were distant, barely reaching you. You had locked yourself in your room, trying to focus on anything but Jungkook and the mess of emotions you were feeling. The mission was getting closer, and you couldn't afford to be distracted, but no matter how hard you tried, your thoughts keep drifting back to him. His smile at Minji, the warmth in his voice you hadn't heard in months. Every little thing he did seemed to push you further away, and you didn't know whether you hated him or missed him. You both know deep down about your feelings for each other, but too stubborn to admit. He used a way to make you jealous and you ignored his entire existence, making him restless. You told yourself it didn't matter. You weren't there for him, you were there for the mission. Still, the silence in your room felt heavy, and the thought of facing him again in the field made your stomach twist. That's when you heard the door open. Jungkook stepped in, his presence filling the room. Impossible to ignore. His eyes scanned the space, landing on you, and you could tell he wasn't here to talk strategy. He was here for something else. You know, the Colonel Park said we need to work as a team. Didn't you hear that part? You didn't answer. Instead, you focused on adjusting your gear. Jungkook's gaze didn't leave you. You can't just ignore me every time things don't go your way. You think you can make your own rules now? Is that how it's going to be? Frustration was visible in his tone, but you stayed silent, making him more annoyed. Lee Vian, stop your childish behavior and come to the practice. Or are you doing this to get my attention, huh? You felt your anger snap. Without thinking, you grabbed your gun, the cold metal feeling like a lifeline. You aimed it at Jungkook, clicking the safety off as a warning. Jungkook's eyes widened a little, but he didn't move. He was always prepared before you could pull the trigger. He grabbed a metal shield nearby and raised it in front of him, blocking the bullets as they bounced off the surface. He moved quickly, dodging the shots easily. The other soldiers who had been outside rushed in, drawn by the gunfire. They stopped in their track when they saw you two, eyes wide with shock. Jungkook lowered the shield, looking at you in disbelief. His expression was a mix of shock and something else, concern, anger. You couldn't tell, but he didn't speak at first, as if he was processing what had happened. You didn't lower your gun, instead, you stepped closer, your voice sharp. Was that better, Commander John? Did I get your attention now? The room went quiet. Jungkook stared at you for a long time, and even though you knew you had made things worse between you two, you felt a strange satisfaction in seeing the shock on his face. It was like a small victory, a reminder that you weren't going to let him push you around. The other man backed away slowly, unsure of what to do, but you kept your eyes on Jungkook. Finally, he took a deep breath, lowered his shield, and his gaze didn't leave you. You think this is the way to prove a point? You want to get my attention, fine, but this? He gestured to the gun in your hand. This is not how we handle things, especially not between us. You didn't flinch at his words. Oh, but you are fine with playing games, aren't you? You looked him up and down, your voice laced with venom. You can joke around with Minji, but I'm supposed to just ignore it. Tension between you was thick and the air felt heavy with all the things you weren't saying. The man standing behind Jungkook was silent, not sure how to react. Jungkook's eyes stayed locked on yours, almost daring you to say something, to make the next move. You could feel the heat of anger rising inside you, but something in his gaze stopped you. Maybe it was the seriousness in his eyes or the hint of a warning in his voice. You didn't say anything else. Instead, you slowly lowered your gun, but your eyes never left his. Maybe next time, Commander John, you won't make things so complicated. Jungkook's face didn't change, but you could see a hint of understanding in his eyes. You're right, it doesn't have to be like this, but you have got to stop testing me. And with that, he turned and left the room, leaving you standing there, still angry and unsure whether you had won or lost this round. It was a high stakes mission, the kind that kept you on edge from the start. You were positioned in a sniper's nest, rifle steady in your hands as you surveyed the enemy compound. The tension was thick, but you kept your focus, knowing the importance of your orders. The comms crackled with Jungkook's voice. Sniper, what's your status? We need those shots cleared. I'm good. I have clear shots on the targets. You responded, your voice cool and focused, but as you prepared for next shot, a sudden explosion rattled the ground beneath you, sending a shockwave through the air. The enemy had somehow detected the team's movements. You could hear gunfire in the distance as the sound of boots pounding on the ground echoed. Sniper, we have been compromised. Get ready for extraction, now. Jungkook barked through the comms, his voice tight with urgency. You adjusted your position quickly, scanning the area through the scope. But that's when you saw it. A sniper on the opposite roof, rifle trained on your position. He had you in his sights and you didn't have time to move. Shit, you muttered to yourself, fingers instinctively tightening around the rifle, but before you could even react, a sharp crack rang out through the air. The sniper's bullet hit the wall beside you, grazing the side of your cheek as you ducked just in time. Your pulse spiked, and for a second, your world narrowed down to nothing but the sound of your breath and the pounding of your heart. Sniper, move! Jungkook shouted again, now frantic, but you couldn't get a clear shot. You couldn't risk moving too much. Another bullet whizzed past you, narrowly missing your head, and you cursed under your breath. You were pinned down, exposed, and the enemy had you in their sights. In that moment, it felt like you were running out of options. Then you heard it, the unmistakable sound of boots pounding against the rooftop. Jungkook had arrived. You whipped your head around just as you saw him take a leap from the edge of the building, landing beside you in a controlled roll. His eyes locked with yours for the briefest second, and despite the danger, you saw that familiar fire in them. He risked his life just to get you out of here safely. Get up, he said, voice gruff as he grabbed your arm and pulled you into a crouch. We are moving now. Why did you come here? There was a silence for some time, because I can't leave you alone here to deal with this. Before you could respond, he yanked you behind covers. Just as another bullet rang out, Jungkook pushed you to the ground behind a metal crate, shielding you with his body. You barely had time to catch your breath when you noticed it. Blood. Jungkook's shoulder was soaked, dark red staining his shirt. He took the bullet for you. Jungkook, you are bleeding. We need to stop the blood. You panicked. His eyes didn't even flinch, though you could see the pain in his face. But there was something else in his gaze, determination. Later, we need to get out of here first. You could see the blood trickling down his arm, but he didn't let it slow him down. Continued firing with deadly precision, taking out the enemy one by one. Jungkook, you're hurt. We need to, I said later. He snapped, his focus unwavering as he moved with purpose. We're almost there. He wasn't about to let the injury slow him down. His only focus was getting you to safety. You wanted to argue, to force him to stop, but you knew there was no time. Stay behind me, he ordered, guiding you as he returned fire, taking down another enemy sniper with a clean shot. We have got 10 seconds before reinforcements show up. With Jungkook leading the way, you sprinted towards the extraction point, his body shielding you from any potential shots. His movements were sharp, deliberate, and even with the bullet wound, he moved like he was untouchable. Once you reached the helicopter, Jungkook shoved you inside, making sure you were safe before jumping in himself. The door slammed shut, and as the helicopter ascended, the adrenaline in your veins began to fade. Jungkook leaned back against the seat, his breathing shallow, the blood from his wound seeping through his shirt. His eyes met yours. Tired, but there was a hint of something else. You okay? He asked, his voice softer now, tinged with concern. You nodded quickly, trying to steady your breath. You are bleeding and still caring about me. For the first time, you saw his lips curving in a warm and weak smile as his eyes were barely opening. Not important. We made it. That's what matters. And then his head landed on your shoulder as he lost his consciousness. Increase the speed. We need to reach the base quickly, you said, pressing his wound tightly, trying to stop the blood. It felt like hours before the helicopter touched down at the base, but you didn't wait for it to come to a complete stop. You helped the medics carry Jungkook out, your grip tight on his hand, not wanting to let go. In the medical room, the beeping of machines was the only sound as you sat beside Jungkook's bed. He had been treated, his wound patched up, but he was still unconscious. His chest rose and fell with each shallow breath, and you couldn't take your eyes off him. Your hands were still stained with his blood, a stark reminder of how close you came to losing him. As you sat there lost in your thoughts, the door opened and a few of the other commandos and sergeants filled in to check on him. You didn't even look up, your focus entirely on Jungkook. They stayed for a few moments, offering their own quiet words of concern, but as soon as you made a slight move, they all left, giving you space. The room was quiet again, and for a long moment you just sat there, watching his chest rise in front. Finally, his eyes fluttered open and he looked at you, though his gaze was unfocused for a moment. You are awake, you said, your voice soft but laced with relief. He blinked slowly, his eyes finally focusing on you. Told you, not important. You leaned in slightly, your hand reaching for his. You nearly died, and yet you still cared about me. He let out a weak chuckle, and for a brief moment you saw that familiar glint in his eyes. It's a part of my job, Ian. I always do whatever it takes to get the job done. You clenched your fist around his hand. By putting your life in danger for me? What about your life, Jungkook? What about that? He didn't say anything at first, just stared at you with those dark eyes that made your heart race. But then his lips parted and he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper, filled with something you couldn't quite place. I can't let even a single scratch come to you. You are everything I'm fighting for. You froze, your breath catching in your throat. You were so used to seeing Jungkook as the cold, calculated man, the one who never showed weakness. But here now, he was different. His vulnerability was raw, exposed, and it hit you harder than any bullet could. Jungkook, do you know what you are saying? He nodded. I know, and now I want you to know that I've always cared for you. Even when we were enemies, I was always watching out for you. I can't explain it, but I couldn't stand the thought of something happening to you. Your heart skipped a beat. His confession was unexpected, but we were rivals. You hated me and I hated you. Jungkook's lips curled into the faintest of smiles, but it wasn't the cold smirk you were used to. I never hated you, Ian. You were always the one who challenged me, the one who had me question everything. I couldn't stand being apart from you, even if it means risking everything. Tears pricked at the corner of your eyes, but you blinked them away. Why didn't you say anything before? Why didn't you let me know? I was scared, scared that you would never feel the same, scared that I would lose everything. But now, after today, I don't care. I just want you to know how much you mean to me, he said, taking your hand in his. You could feel your heart swelling, the weight of his words settled deep within you. You had always been so focused on keeping your distance, on being the strong, independent soldier, but now it felt like everything was falling into place. You leaned in closer, your voice barely above a whisper, but you couldn't keep it in anymore. I, I've always cared for you too, Jungkook. I just never know how to say it. He smiled, this time more brightly, as though a weight had been lifted off his chest. Then let's stop pretending we don't feel it, because we both know we do. You nodded. Okay, let's stop pretending, but just so that I notice you. Stop being over friendly and caring about Minji. I know why you do that, but I can't ignore or forgive that. He let out a soft yet amused chuckle. Okay, so you caught me. While I never got overboard, I swear. It's always a professional interaction as she's a part of the team, and maybe I've got a little soft just because you are near, and yes, I want your attention, but I don't think I would ever need to do that. I'm sorry if I hurt you because of that. You smiled, a rare smile that made Jungkook's heart skip a beat. You're forgiven this time, and you both chuckled softly. And in that moment, you realized the rivalry you had once shared had turned into something far more powerful, something that had the potential to change everything between you both.